Thank you so much. To provide our overview of child poverty in California and the facts and figures, we're very, very fortunate to have Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Barbara is a former member of the State Assembly, a former member of the State Senate, and for the last 15 years has been one of the most forceful and progressive voices in Congress for social and economic justice. When I first met with Nancy Pelosi about the work that Grace is going to be undertaking, she said, in addition to working with Karen Bass, you also need to work with Barbara Lee, who has really helped focus the Congress for many years on the issues of poverty and economic justice. And even with this very, very forceful advocacy, she's somehow able to form relationships, personal rapport across the aisle, which, as you know, today is often difficult. I just want to mention, in terms of Congresswoman Lee's background, that she originally went to Mills College up north as a single mother with 2 children on public assistance, and went on to graduate from Mills, went on to get her master's in social work, and was working as a psychiatric social worker when first elected to the Assembly. So she brings an enormous background. One personal note, with the kind of schedule that a member of Congress has, and certainly that's true for people like Representative Bass and Representative Barbara Lee, where every minute is scheduled. I remember so clearly meeting with Barbara, and the name of a mutual friend came up who was in the hospital. And Barbara wanted me to call him. And in the 2 days it took me to call him, she had followed up with me twice to make sure that I did in the midst of her travel. And I think it's that kind of personal warmth that is part of the reason that she's been so effective. Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Thank you, Conway, first of all, for that very warm and gracious introduction. Also, just let me thank you for your commitment and your tireless efforts, really as an advocate on behalf of our children, but really you're helping to secure our future, because of what you're doing. So thank you again, Conway, so much. Let me say good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for being here today. All of you are making such an incredible impact here in California, and so I just have to thank you for your contributions. Also, I want to thank Grace, the Daughters of Charity, California Endowment, for convening today's conference, because this continued leadership and advocacy on behalf of the most vulnerable, on behalf of our children and families, you're setting really here in California the bar, and you're my example for me to take to the Congress as to what California can and will do. And so thank you so much. Let me just say to Marion, it's so good to see you here, my friend, my sister. This woman, I tell you, she's been on the forefront of tackling childhood poverty and children's issues for many, many years. And I just have to say, when I see you in the Capitol, bending the ears of lawmakers, I really know that our children's voices are being heard. There are very few people who do this kind of lobbying, and Marion does that, so it's good to see you in California, Marion. Let me just say a couple of things as it relates to poverty. First of all, poverty in the richest and most powerful country in the world is a disgrace. It's a shame, it's un-American, and it's unacceptable. Like for you, this issue is very important to me. It's the defining issue of our time on an economic, moral, and political level. But also, as Conway says, it's also deeply personal for me. I would not be here where I am today if it were not for our nation's safety net. In the 70s, I was a single mother at Mills College and a student trying to raise 2 boys. And like many then and today, I faced some very difficult periods and times in my life. So I was on public assistance, food stamps, Medi-Cal. And this safety net was a bridge over troubled waters for my children and for me. And so I would not be standing here today as a member of Congress if it weren't for the generosity of the American people and really the lifeline that was provided during that very difficult time. Now here we are today in 2013, and this safety net is really at risk. Children around the country, especially here in California, and in my own home district, the 13th District of California, Alameda County, they go hungry at night. Children are falling behind in school because of empty bellies. 24% of kids in my district, again, in Alameda County, live below the poverty line. So this weighs heavily on my heart, like I know it does on your heart. In my district, a family headed by a single woman is 3 times as likely to live in poverty. And poverty is not just about money and jobs. This is about families, it's about our social structure, even about incarceration. 3% of our children in this country have incarcerated parents, and 3/4 of families with a history of incarceration live below the poverty line. So this is a multi-layered problem which demands a comprehensive solution. Now, for too long, most members of Congress and elected officials focus only on the middle class. And of course, we must strengthen our middle class. But we have millions who are low income, who are poor, and who are part of the working poor in this country. And so we must not abandon them, but we must make them a priority. And as Conway said, Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer on our side in Congress, have made this a priority. They appointed me to chair the WIP's task force on poverty, opportunity, and income inequality. And I also co-chair the Congressional Black Caucus's task force on poverty and the economy. And I started the Out of Poverty Caucus during the Bush administration, knowing where those economic policies were taking us. I share this because I want to make sure that here in California, we develop a closer partnership between what you're doing here in California and what we're doing in Washington, D.C. Because finally, we see leadership beginning to talk about what you have been, and Conway and Marion and Peter and everyone have been talking about for years and years and years, and that's income inequality. We're beginning to focus on that like no time before. I was encouraged by President Obama's speech on poverty and income inequality, which I was really honored to attend. And let me just read you a quote of what he said. He said, "The idea that so many children are born into poverty in the wealthiest nation on earth is heartbreaking enough. But the idea that a child may never be able to escape that poverty because she lacks a decent education or health care or a community that views her future as her own, that should offend all of us. It should compel us to action. We are a better country than this." The report here in California, let me just highlight a couple of facts. California's child poverty crisis, and yes, it is a crisis. The statistics are alarming. And again, these are more than statistics, as you know. These are people, these are human beings. There are 2 million children in California living in poverty, 10% of which are white children. In the immigrant population, we have 29% of children living in poverty, 30% overall of Latino children living in poverty, and a startling 33% of African American children living in poverty here in our home state. In my congressional district alone, 23% of children live in poverty. Again, unacceptable, unconscionable, and it's wrong. Now, what's startling to most people is what kind of families, we look at what kind of families these children come from. A majority, 61% of poor children in California live in working families. They're part of the working poor. Low-wage jobs with no benefits. Their families are struggling to put food on the table, and here now we have a huge looming cut in SNAP benefits. And what's more, just about 48% of poor children in California live in families where neither parent has a high school education. And so poverty is deep, it's structural, and it's persistent. These statistics underscore the critical need for us to protect our vital human needs and proven anti-poverty programs. But let me tell you, I'm a member of the House Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee with Chairman Paul Ryan. Okay? They have Paul Ryan and Barbara Lee. We go at it, you know? And I can tell you firsthand, they're under attack, and the impact on children is devastating. Funding for programs like SNAP, 2.5 million children rely on SNAP every day in California. That program's under attack. The existence of the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, that's under attack. EITC has lifted nearly 5 million children in California out of poverty alone. 5 million children. The Affordable Care Act, along with the Medi-Cal expansion, that's nearly 6,000 children are eligible for Medi-Cal here in California. Yet we know and we see what's happening with ACA. So we've got to go also beyond protecting our safety net. We must expand our safety net, yes, expand it, but we've got to invest in our economy and commit to tackling poverty and inequality head-on through investments in education. We've got to rebuild our crumbling schools, make public education and universal pre-K a priority. We've got to prepare our young people for the jobs of the 21st century, but also just help them develop the skills and knowledge that they need to grow up to live the American dream that they so deserve to do. And so we've got to focus on job creation, workforce training, rebuilding our infrastructure, investing in technology and clean energy. But we've also got to target these investments, and I keep talking about targeting these investments to areas of most need, but also remember that we've got institutional racism and discrimination that have led to disparities overall, and yes, unfortunately, racism and poverty are interrelated. And so we cannot forget that. And we've got to include support for the formerly incarcerated. Second Chance Act, reentry, all of those issues that are so structural that we would not oftentimes see this as a pathway out of poverty, but we've got to look at what we're doing as it relates to those who are incarcerated and coming out of jail and their families. So finally, let me just say, I hope you will support and look at my bill, Cutting Poverty in Half in 10 Years. We can do it. We can end poverty. It's H.R. 2182. For those of you who have members of Congress who have not supported this, ask them to please go on as co-sponsors. We've got a major movement in the country taking place, half in 10, half in 10. So I know and I firmly believe that working together, we can and will make the 50th anniversary, which is next year, of the War on Poverty, a year that we can recommit ourselves to ending poverty for good. In closing, I just have to say, as a woman of faith, educated by the Sisters of Loretta in El Paso, Texas, I take my faith seriously when it comes to the poor and the most vulnerable. And I have to close by a scripture that I'm very inspired by all the time, Psalms 72, verse 4. May he defend the cause of the poor among the people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. Thank you again.